I am recording the meeting this evening. Well, this session I'll try to sketch how corpus-based analysis is used in research in second or foreign language learning, how this methodology is made, in fact is at the disposal of researchers to have access to a large amount of data and to facilitate analysis, because with the flexibilities that corpus data provide to the researchers, in fact, and the software programs that are now available, analysis of the data is also facilitated. But what is a corpus? Let's start with this question. What is a corpus? A written text I asked, what is a corpus? Here it is. You will find it in my presentation. See it in the screen, on the screen. A corpus-based analysis. Yes. A corpus is a collection of written texts or a spoken text, right, which is transcribed and becomes written. So a collection of written texts. And if you have a collection of, let us say, a collection of, let us say, 10 million words. Yes, how huge your data size can be. A collection of 3 million words. Imagine you have 2,000 essays written by students all around Iraq. 2,000 essays. That can be very huge database. Imagine you can have something like 1,000 research articles written in the field of applied linguistics, and you have gathered them all in a file. You have formed your own database of 1,000 research articles. 1,000 research articles can make a database of something like 7 million words. 6 or 7 million words. That is a huge corpus. What would you be able to do with this? If you can make a database of, let us say, 2,000 compositions written by Iraqi students of English, what would you be able to do with it? And guess your data size reaches 3 million words, what would you be able to do with it? No suggestion? It helps to provide quantitative evidence of the existence of discourses. Yes. Yes, because you feed all this data into your computer, and if you have the related software program, that it enables you to analyze your data quantitatively, and so you can elicit a lot of information about the students' writing abilities, how they write, how they use verbs, how they use adjectives, how they use nouns, how accurate they are in the structures, in the grammatical resources that they use, how prepositions are accurately used. Imagine you want to check the students making questions. So you would have lots of examples of making questions. Imagine you would like to see how students use a word. Take my example here, fairly. Take my first example, fairly. How many times has fairly been used? 11 times. This fairly was used in Mark Twain's novel Huckleberry Finn. Right? The novel is 11,000 words. Only 11,000 words. And the word fairly is used 11 times. Right? This is an example of what we call concordance. Now, having a database like 3 million words requires a lot of work on the part. I am going to suggest that this corpus to a smaller scale can be used by language teachers in classes to facilitate teaching and learning. In fact, in language classes, we can use learner corpora. And in research, we can also use these learner corpora. But what is a learner corpus? A learner corpus is a corpus which is derived from learners' performances. A learner corpus is a corpus which is extracted from learners' writings. So, for instance, you might have access to students' compositions. You might have access to students' other kinds of writing, other types of writing, like essays, weekly essays that you might have asked them. You might have asked students to make summaries of the stories. And so you have collected all these summaries of the stories that they have made, developing a corpus. Learner corpus research is an area of investigation in second or foreign language learning that relies on learner corpora. This area of research took shape in 1980s. Learner corpus research studies language on the basis of corpora. That is, by corpora, which is the plural form of corpus, we mean computerized databases of written or spoken texts. Computerized databases of written or spoken texts. Computerized because, well, you save it in your computer. Corpus-based linguistics throws light on three facets or phases of language. Frequency. The first one is frequency, because you have, well, large frequencies. You are dealing with large frequencies. Yes, in grammar books you might not have more than 1 or 2 examples of fairly, but you check 11,000 words a novel and then you end up with 11 examples. See? Take another example, for instance. In the same story, I think it's in the same story. Guess how many examples of pretty was found? I think something like 160 examples of pretty. Yes, 155 examples. 155 examples in 11,000 words. Quite were found in the same story. So sometimes you would have a large number of examples, and in no grammar book, in no dictionary, can you find 155 examples of pretty. What would be the benefit of this? If you have a large number of examples, what would be the benefit of these examples? Is there any benefit to it? Any suggestion? Showing generalization, yes. See, Take this word pretty. We call this word as the node word, N-O-D-E, node word. Then there is some language before it and some language after it. And if you are careful enough and do some simple analysis on the words that appear before it, words that appear after it, then you would simply learn what words, what expressions are more frequently used with pretty. What words or expressions will more frequently follow pretty. So you would be able to learn about the behavior of the pretty and how it can determine what expressions frequently occur before it, what expressions frequently occur after it. This enables you to make generalizations. And so you would learn about how this word is used. This is the immediate benefit or contribution that might come from the study of learner corpora. We usually have before it 4 words and after it also 4 words, but recent programs, software programs, enable you to have access to even a paragraph before the word pretty. If you wish to know more about the context before it, more about the context following it, new software programs enable you to have access to a lot of language even before or after the word pretty. So these lines and the way that they are arranged these lines and the examples that are arranged are called concordance lines. Concordance lines. Right? The main word pretty is called lemma or node. And the lines are called concordance lines. When you read them horizontally, linearly, it tells you information about how the word is used. For instance, notice that on the right of the word pretty is frequently used. Pretty soon I wanted, pretty soon she would say, pretty soon a spider went, pretty soon I heard. See? Pretty soon Jim says, pretty soon comfortable again, pretty soon ducked under, so on and so forth. So you would come to learn that pretty soon is frequently used, and this is one of those collocations or expressions. So this way it enables us to make generalizations. And guess you as a researcher have access to a database of something like 2,000 essays which you have fed into your computer, forming a database of 3 million words. Then you would be able to look into your database and extract these patterns. And you would learn about the behavior of your language learners. So Learner corpus data fall within the more open-ended types of second language acquisition data. Much research, unfortunately I should say, much research in second language acquisition research has focused on language tests, questionnaires, formal tests, but it is unfortunate to say that research has not focused very much on clinical data or natural language use data. By natural language use data, I mean data that is generated or produced by students themselves, like essays, like compositions, like other types of texts that they are required to write. In many studies, they focus on questionnaires, for instance, or they ask people to, I don't know, take a test. Well, information of this kind might be useful. However, if students produce texts, oral or written, for instance, when they participate in interviews, and then you record the interviews, or when they write a composition, right, and then you analyze their interviews or their compositions, you would get a better picture of the student language proficiency, language behavior. These data are natural language use data, or what we call clinical data. You might ask people to, well, answer some fill-in-the-blank questions. That can be useful, to answer some fill-in-the-blank questions, but it does not give you profound information about the language behavior of your learners. But if you ask them to write a composition, then it can be very revealing. Fill in the blanks language tests of traditional kinds, like a multiple choice test, are called experimental data. Experimental data fall outside corpus linguistics. So take this example of pretty and see how well expressions before it, what expressions following it are used. Or take the other example, quite. Didn't get that place and didn't get quite touch ground. Weren't quite shit. I haven't lived here quite 2 weeks, but you weren't quite satisfied. It weren't quite midnight yet. It's as if oftentimes, well, negative marker is used before quite. You see, you can make generalizations we can easily make generalizations, and this can help us a lot. See how many times this expression soon is used, and of course other words like good. Still, soon seems to be the most frequent. But this is not the only generalization. You can make a lot of generalizations. If you spend some time, see how many times this word pretty soon. We also have other expressions like pretty much, pretty good, pretty well, pretty rusty, pretty wide, right? Which you can easily gather that pretty is followed by adjective. But yes, Mr. Kazim.
Hi, Doctor. How are you doing?
Hello.
Thanks for giving me a chance to ask. Just I have simple questions. So, do you think that this corpus, just to help us to know what is coming before and after the word, so just to clarify the idea that what is coming before and what is coming after, if it is yes, what is the benefit behind that? So, what is the most important thing behind that?
That's a very important question.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for the question.
Thanks.
Well, in fact, as researchers, as a language teacher as well as a researcher, you would like to know about the way that your language learners use language and whether they use it in the right way as native speakers do. Just imagine you have a collection of expressions that your language learners have used, and you do not know to what extent these expressions are correct or not. Or they use the word pretty in some context, and you know that in some context this word pretty is used correctly, but it seems that in other contexts they do not use it in the right way. And if you have a database in which you can find the word pretty as used by native speakers, then you can show it to your students. Then you can present it to your students to see how the word pretty is used by native speakers. You can also compare your students' texts with the native speakers' texts to see how far or how close they are in terms of use. You would be able to see the differences and similarities, and then present the differences and similarities to your students. It is through this representation of the differences and similarities that you would be able to sensitize. What is your purpose? Your purpose is to give your language learners consciousness, awareness of whether they are correctly using language or whether they are not correctly using it. And if you have a database of this kind, you would have a rich resource telling the students, well, the way that they can use this and the variety of patterns that this word pretty is used. In research, well, if you have 30 people, 40 people, asking them to sit a test, for instance, a TOEFL test, and then on that basis you want to judge their language proficiency, or you are going to test one part of language and then you ask people to, well, fill in some blanks, and then on the basis of the blanks that they fill in, You are going to judge the behavior of these people. How reliable would you be? 30 people, 40 people have participated and they have answered some questions. How reliable? How valid? How much can you believe in the students' performance? They have only, answered some questions, for instance. But compare it with a database of this kind. 3 million words, 4 million words. Which one would be more, rich in terms of language? Which one would be more reliable? Here you would have a lot of data. Here you don't need to be worried about the smallness of data, the paucity of data. But there, with a test, with a language proficiency test, or some fill-in-the-blank exercises, you would have a little amount of data. Yes, Mr. Cousin.
No, sir, I didn't have a question. No, that was. But just I want to add one idea here for your own speech, for your own comment. I don't know. Just I want to make sure of you. So what is you said is that this system that help us to know what is before and what is after, and this will facilitate for the students, and also this will help the teacher in the class or anywhere to know the behaviorism of his own student. Okay, so doctor, do you think that this is a mean of, or it is a way of to show reliabilities also? That's all. Thank you.
No. Reliability is not our concern here, in fact. What I said, what I am trying to say is that, databases of this kind gives researchers a lot of data about how language is used. So in pedagogy, in language teaching, you can also use this as a resource to show your students how language is used. Even when they use language themselves, and then you collect their compositions, and then you feed them into your computer, you can use it as a learner corpus, as a learner corpora. Then you can extract patterns, and then show these patterns to your students. It's not only the question of what words appear before, what words appear after. It's the question of teaching patterns of language to your students. It's the question of drawing their attention, bringing to their attention how these words are used. This is the major concern in teaching. The major problem in teaching is to enable your language learners to use language patterns in the right way. You work very hard, but still your students produce language that is ungrammatical. They wrongly use a database of this kind. You would simply be able to show them how accurate they can be in the way that they use these words. And as a researcher, you don't need to be worried about collecting data. If you have access to a database of 3 or 4 or 5 million words, then you would be able to do a lot of research. And so you would be able to extract those patterns. So it's not only the question of reliability. Reliability is taken care of, definitely. Definitely, if you have a database of this kind, then your study would be more reliable. I said that if you ask your students to fill in some blank spaces, like when you give them a questionnaire and they have to choose some answers. or you give them a language test and they have to answer those questions. Well, the reliability of such tests is questionable. But if you have a database like a corpus of 2 million words, then the reliability is high, because you are bombarding people with lots of examples. So reliability is taken care of here. Reliability would be very high here. Well, if you have a database of this kind, your database is not controlled, it's uncontrolled. You have uncontrolled production data. You have compositions that have been produced by students. Tests, fill in the blank exercises, short answers. These are not natural data. Natural data, by natural data we mean data that is produced by students naturally, like compositions. You see, this is a huge difference. If you ask people to answer a test, a language proficiency test, if you ask people to, answer a questionnaire, if you ask people to fill in some blank spaces, these are not natural data. These are non-natural data. These are controlled data. But compositions are uncontrolled, because you do not tell people what to write, what not to write. They write themselves. That is, data of this kind are natural, uncontrolled, and more reliable, more valid, more reliable. But unfortunately, do you not have my voice? Right, thank you. So, Mr. Ahmed, you might check your own connections. Thank you. So it is unfortunate to say that uncontrolled natural production data has been relatively neglected in second language acquisition studies in favor of introspection data. Like, by introspection data I mean language proficiency tests, fill in the blank exercises, grammaticality judgment tasks, right, or more controlled types of production data. And the reason is that natural data or naturalistic data has been found to suffer from drawbacks or problems. They say, well, the natural data are not sufficient. Natural data are not available. This is one of the reasons, they say. They say we cannot find, for instance, a large number of control over the variables that can influence production. When students write compositions, they say we do not have control over the production. And the third reason they raise is the difficulty of interpreting these data. All these three reasons, in fact, lose their validity when applied to corpus data. All these three reasons fall to pieces, because learn a corpus in fact, overcomes these problems. If you have a corpus of 2 million words, well, then you don't need to wait for people to write their compositions. I can suggest you some examples of learner corpus available to you via the internet. One example is MiCASP. You might check this for instance. MiCASP. Yes, MiCASP. This is Michigan corpus of spoken. I think this Michigan corpus of spoken. I don't know, spoken English, whatever, spoken language proficiency, something like that. But write this in your Google and you will find it. It includes something like 800 compositions, I think. 800 compositions. One of my MA students has recently done some research on the compositions in MiCASP. So, to say that, compositions are not sufficient, or we don't have access to compositions, this is wrong, because there are databases which are available to people, and you can have access to those databases with a large number of texts. Recently, I was in contact with IELTS company in Cambridge, and one of my PhD students who's now living in Canada, needed to have access to samples of IELTS composition task 2. We went through communication with these people in Cambridge, and they accepted to send us those compositions. Believe me, they sent us more than 1,000 compositions coming from 5 native language backgrounds. Something like 200 compositions written by Arabians. Something like 150 written by Italians. Close to 200 by Portuguese. And that is a huge database. 1,000 examples, more than we could imagine. Right? So, if you are looking for database, then you would be able to find it. And you would have no problem. You would have no problem in fact, you will have no problem checking these features of language if you have that database. Because you have a large amount of data. But guess if you have a language test, what would you be able to do with that? If you have some fill in the blanks, how would these fill in the blanks enable you to extract information? The amount of information that you extract from fill in the blanks is very limited. But the amount of information that you would be able to elicit from a database is unbelievably large. Or they say, well, you have no control over the main variables that can influence production. Again, this is false. This is false. If you have learner corpora, learner corpora are usually accompanied by ethnographic data. By ethnographic data, I mean information about writers' native language, about their gender, whether they are male or female, about their age. You might be able to categorize them. People, for instance, between 20 and 30. People, texts written by people between 20 and 30. Texts written by people between 30 and 40. It enables you to categorize texts on the basis of their gender, on the basis of their age, on the basis of their mother tongue. They sent us about close to 1,000 examples of compositions, and they came from different languages. So we can easily judge these compositions written by Italian, or compositions written by the Arabs, compositions written by the Spanish, and so you would be able to compare similarities and differences. Even, compositions in terms of topics, because, some of these topics might be close, still others might be very different. Compositions can be classified in terms of length. Some of these compositions are long, some of these compositions are short. And you might want to compare long and short compositions. You see that we are reading them. My PhD student is now working on them. So we do not need all of them, of course. We needed something like 200 or so, but they were generous enough to send us close to 1,000. Or they say that it's difficult to interpret them. Mid-case, yes, mid-case is another one. Yes, mid-case and mid-cusp. If you check Michigan database, well, yes, it gives you access to both of them. Another student of mine is working on mid-case. Well, why not take a sample? You take a sample when you don't have a software program, but if you have a software program, why taking samples? You take a sample when you cannot interpret the population, right? When you cannot interpret the population, but if you can interpret all the population via a program, a software program, then why should you take a sample? So the third problem that they level against, corpora, studies with uncontrolled production data, they say difficulty in interpreting. Yes, Michigan Corps of Spoken Academic, mid-case, and the other one is mid-cusp. Michigan Corporal upper level student papers. Right. So another difficulty that they raise is well, interpreting the data. In fact, interpreting the data in learner-based corpora is very easy. It's not that difficult because you have software programs, you feed your data into the program, and then, well, all the information would be out, right? So, for instance, they say in compositions that the students write, well, they might avoid certain patterns. You know, avoidance is one of the strategies. If you do not know a structure, for instance, you try to use other structures to replace the original structure. If you do not know a word, so you avoid it, and so you try to use another simpler word which is available to you. And they say in learner corpora, these problems cannot be identified. That is, where students avoid certain structures, this cannot be identified. This is also wrong because the software programs allows you to well, to see what expressions are overused and what expressions are underused. In fact, a good number of research studies have been done using learner corpora. I told you, 3 students of mine are now engaged in doing research using learner corpora. One is Sarah, who is now in Canada. 2 of them are based in Iran. One is Miss Osrush, who will defend her thesis in 20 days or so from now. And a third student of mine, who is now working on MICASP, she will also defend her thesis in 1 or 2 months from now. Well, I would invite you to participate in their defense sessions. You would sure learn a lot from the way that these learner corpora are used in research. You can develop your own classroom corpus if you have patience and if you have determination. You might develop your own classroom corpus if you are teaching, for instance, in some institutes or schools, and you collect students' compositions. You might well ask your students to well write in their laptops and then send writing to you. So gradually, after a few years, you see that you have developed your own corpus, which would come in quite handy and useful for your own personal purposes. Alternatively, you might have access to such international databases like MICASE and MICASP, so corpus, which is collected on a larger scale. So you as a teacher might collect your own database, or you might rely on corpora, depending on the corpora can be classified according to the target language that they sample. As I said, we were given Well, learn a corpora from Italian, from Spanish, from Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, from, well, the Arabs, right? So learner corpora can be classified according to the target language of the students. Or, well, it might be well, written or spoken. So you might develop two corpora. Well, a corpus of written compositions, a corpus of spoken interviews, for instance, or spoken language. You might even arrange them in terms of text type. So in your corpus, you might have some argumentative text, you might have expository text, you might have check me cusp and me case. Well, you will find different text types. Text of argumentation, text of description, text of narration. So you might arrange your texts in terms of type. But how do you do research using well, corpus-based linguistics? First, you decide on your methodology. Your methodology might be corpus-based or corpus-driven. If it is corpus-based, then it is top-down, deductive. Top-down, deductive. You have raised questions in advance, you have developed hypotheses. I have talked about these earlier. Your research might be corpus-driven. That is, you don't have hypotheses in advance, but in fact, your study is bottom-up, and you generate questions. Yes, generate questions. So first is your choice of methodology. Then you have to collect your own corpus, or you have to have access to an already existing corpus. Then you go through well, processes like data annotation or data extraction. These are the stages in doing research using corpus data. Then you go through data analysis. Your data analysis would be something like this. Something like, well, the concordance lines that I have well, shown you now. Like the word pretty. That would be analysis. But you do not stop here, of course. You would, I mean, the program, the software program, enables you to draw these concordance lines, and then you should be able to extract patterns. You have to elicit, you now have to elicit those patterns from these, otherwise concordance lines would be of little use. It is important to look into these concordance lines and draw out patterns of language use. These patterns have to be interpreted. you interpret them for pedagogical purposes. Sometimes, well, what do I mean by data annotation? Nobody asked me. Data annotation. For instance, for a word like pretty, you don't need any annotation, right? For a word like pretty, you don't need annotation. Or for a word like quite, you don't need annotation. Or for a word like fairly, you don't need annotation. Annotation is when you have a word in English, for instance, with two different meanings, as a noun or as a verb. Yes, the process of adding metadata. So if you have a word like cover, for instance, cover, C-O-V-E-R. And this word cover, well, can be a noun or it can be a verb. And imagine in your research you're going to focus on noun only, not the verb. But your database is not conscious of that. You need to have some metadata. You need to give information to your program that you are looking for cover with this grammatical function, for instance. So you add a little metadata, and metadata would enable the program to screen screen cover with cover as a noun or cover as a verb. As I said, learner corpus research enables us to focus on linguistic features that distinguish learner language from native language. If you have compositions that are written by non-native learners of English and compositions written by native speakers of English, and then you compare their compositions, well, that information can be very revealing, because you would compare and contrast the specifications of native language and non-native learners of English, and so that can help pedagogy a lot. This area is called contrastive interlanguage analysis. To give you an example, let me just check my student research to tell you something solid. Wow. Let me tell you what my student This is what my student is right now doing. And this is the title of her thesis. Formulaic language in native and non-native texts, a corpus-based study of upper-level students' texts in MICASP. We are interested in formulaic language. Right? By formulaic language, we mean groups of words that seem to go together. Groups of words that seem to go together. Like what? Like for instance, they are different from collocations, of course. Like you say, get pretty sultry. Get pretty well. You see? Get pretty well. These are examples in what language is used where in MICASP. And in MICASP you have texts that are written by upper level students and texts that are written by native writers. Right? Is that clear? Or let me give you another example. Compares lexical bundles. Lexical bundles are like formulaic language. Lexical bundles in a student's argumentative writing and materials designed for IELTS applicants. So my student has developed two corpora. A corpus of students argumentative writing, something like 400 argumentative writings by students, and she has also developed another corpus of argumentative texts that appear in IELTS books available in the market. Right, so we have developed two corpora, a corpus of argumentative text written by IELTS applicants and a corpus of argumentative texts that she has extracted from these textbooks that are available in the market. What is the goal? The purpose is to see how lexical bundles are used by native writers in IELTS textbooks as compared to those lexical bundles as used by non-native writers. And this can be pedagogically very important because we will be able to see how close or how distant our students are from the norms of language use, patterns of language use by native writers of English. All right? I hope I have been able to give you an idea of how corpus linguistics can be used in research. About the book, is there a specific one we shall read? Well, it's what I said is a chapter that comes from Mackay and gas. Check my syllabus. Mackay and gas. Let me just write it. There is a chapter, right? The chapter is how to use foreign and second language learner Cobra. How to use foreign and second language learner Cobra. All right. I do not know the number. check the chapters. What is it? What are the kinds of questions you will bring to us in the final? Don't worry. My examination is open-ended. It is open book. Right? I don't have closed examinations. My examinations are open books. I said, don't worry, because I have open book examinations. All right, thank you very much for tonight. And have a nice evening. Bye.